The day after graduation, the school's reigning queen, Isabella Vance, pulled me into the woods behind the school right in front of everyone. Before I could figure out what was happening, she kissed me, and the sweet, distinctly feminine taste of her lip gloss filled my mouth. Then, her voice choked with tears, she said, "Ethan, I'll give you my heart, my future, everything, if you'll just promise me one thing. My life is yours." I was taken aback. It turned out this was all because her mother was sick and urgently needed $100,000 for surgery. Even though $100,000 was barely half a month's allowance for a trust fund underachiever like me, I still turned her down without a second thought. The heart of the valedictorian ice queen might be a precious thing, but too bad for her. I'm not a guy who believes in love. My parents married for the sake of a family alliance and have maintained the facade of a model couple for over 20 years. Do they have hearts? Maybe, but they gave them to people outside our family. So don't talk to me about hearts, I don't buy it. I straightened up and walked over to her, a full head taller. I could clearly see her trembling eyelashes, adorned with glistening teardrops. I reached out my hand. She tensed up, instinctively shutting her eyes. My finger flicked her gently on the forehead. Isabella froze, her eyes fluttering open to stare at me in confusion. I pulled my hand back, looked her straight in the eye, and said, word by word, "Isabella, get one thing straight. Do you want me to be a scumbag who takes advantage of your situation? Or do you want me to be a good guy and help you out of the kindness of my heart?" She was completely stunned, staring at me blankly, her brain clearly having short-circuited. But I was patient, just watching her. Finally, she snapped out of it, her tense shoulders slumping in defeat. With a sliver of desperate hope, Isabella whispered, her voice barely audible, "Help me, please." I shook my head decisively. "No, I'm not a philanthropist. I may have a lot of money, but I don't spend it on pointless things. After all, $100,000 could buy me a few dozen bottles of vintage champagne." The plea in her eyes instantly turned to despair. Seeing her look so utterly broken, the flicker of cruel amusement in me died down. I changed my tune. "However, while I don't want to be a scumbag or a saint, we can be business partners. I remember your grades are excellent, which makes you a promising stock for the future. So, I can lend you the money as a personal investment. I can transfer the $100,000 to you right now." Her eyes lit up with incredible, disbelieving joy. "But I have one condition. In 10 years, you have to pay me back $150,000. The interest isn't high, it shouldn't be hard for you. Also, you must get into an Ivy League school after the SATs. That will be the first proof of your repayment potential, and it's the risk management clause for this investment." As if grasping her last lifeline, she nodded emphatically, terrified I would change my mind. I gave her my number, turned, and walked away, not bothering to see the expression on her face. Walking out of the woods, the sun felt warm on my skin. The truth was, I didn't care if she ever paid me back. $100,000 was nothing to me. The contract was just for show, otherwise every Tom, Dick, and Harry would be hitting me up for loans, and even I couldn't afford that. Spending $100,000 to buy myself the self-satisfaction of doing a good deed for the day, while also getting a front-row seat to the Ice Queen's desperation, wasn't a bad deal at all. After talking to my lawyer, I set up a time and place and forwarded the contract to Isabella. That was that. I started walking toward my original destination, a club activity room. Through the window, I could see my childhood friend, Scarlett Hayes, chatting animatedly with some punk. The Hayes family and my family, the Caldwells, were old allies with close business ties, so Scarlett and I were basically childhood friends. That was all fine, but the main thing was her older sister, Victoria Hayes. She was a true powerhouse, beautiful, ruthless in business, and, most importantly, incredibly generous to me. The allowance she gave me was always in the 7-figure range. For a guy like me who was just coasting through life, she was a walking ATM. What's more, Victoria was about to get engaged to my picture-perfect older brother, Liam, making her my future sister-in-law. With our families even more intertwined, my life as a wealthy slacker would be even more secure. But recently, Scarlett's grades had plummeted from the top of the class to mediocre, all for some punk. When Victoria herself called to ask me about it, I knew I had to step in. After all, when you take someone's money, you've got to do them a favor now and then. Before I even opened the door, a guy came running out and crashed right into me. He stumbled back, his eyes filled with humiliation and resentment. I recognized him. He was a scholarship kid Scarlett used to sponsor. Good grades, quiet type. From the look of him, this was a classic case of, I fell for my benefactor, but my benefactor fell for a bad boy. I shook my head, wanting to laugh. The kid was so naive. For rich kids like us, throwing money at things is often just a habit, a way to show off our status. It doesn't make us saints. If you really want to show gratitude, you climb the ladder and pay it back with tangible benefits. That's how the world works. Getting feelings involved is just asking for trouble. I ignored him and pushed open the ajar door. Scarlett was laughing her head off with the punk, whose name was Drake. When she saw me, her smile froze, and her brow furrowed with suspicion and annoyance. "Ethan, what are you doing here? Are you also here to tell me to break up with Drake? I'm telling you, don't waste your breath. You're the useless son of the Caldwell family, You can't even figure out your own life. What right do you have to meddle in mine? I wasn't angry. I actually found it amusing. I'm not meddling. I'm just curious how the prim and proper Hayes family good girl suddenly developed a taste for this. Scarlett raised her voice, her tone dripping with contempt. What would you know? Drake isn't like you phony rich kids. He's real, he's free. She grabbed Drake's arm, her face glowing with an almost fanatical admiration. This is what living is. Your kind of cookie-cutter life is boring, a waste of a life. Then she turned on me again. Especially you, Ethan. You're bad at school, you're not even good at having fun. Besides being a Caldwell, what are you? You're a complete and utter waste of space. I nodded, feigning an epiphany. Got it. The call of the wild, right? Scarlett probably thought she'd won me over, a smug look spreading across her face. Drake puffed out his chest, his expression toward me losing its earlier fear. The next second, I was looking down at Scarlett. Are you sober now? My gaze made her take an involuntary step back. On the floor, Drake was still groaning, his eyes now filled with terror. I walked over to Drake. You like things real, right? You like being free? Come on, tell me, how does this feel? Feeling free right now. Drake was sweating bullets from the pain, unable to utter a single word. Scarlett tried to pull me away, but I shot her a look that stopped her in her tracks. Weren't you all talk just now? Why are you so quiet? He was trembling, not daring to make a sound. I suddenly lost interest. This little coward was trying to date an heiress? What a joke. I grabbed the still shaking Scarlett and drove straight to the city's notoriously rough west side. I dragged her out of the car and pushed her against the wall of a filthy alley. The overwhelming stench of piss and rotting garbage hit us, and Scarlett immediately threw up. I pointed to a few bleach-blonde punks screaming at each other at the alley's entrance, my voice ice-cold. Look, there's your call of the wild. Is that real enough for you? Free enough? If you like it so much, I can throw you over there right now. Scarlett's face went pale with fright. She clung to my arm, sobbing breathlessly. I was wrong, Ethan. Let's go home, please. Just then, I caught a familiar figure in my peripheral vision. It was Drake limping away. He'd snuck out the other end of the alley when I wasn't looking. I couldn't be bothered to chase him. Trash like that wasn't worth my time. Scarlett obviously saw him too, and the color drained completely from her face. Her last shred of fantasy shattered with that fleeing figure. She stopped crying and just stood there, dazed, as if her soul had been ripped out. I shoved her back into the car, and she didn't say a word the entire ride. When we reached the Hayes estate, she opened the door herself and walked in like a ghost. I didn't get out. I just told the driver to turn around and take me home. That night, I got a text on iMessage from Victoria. Ethan, thanks. I sent back a "you're welcome" emoji, and that was the end of it. Sure enough, the next 2 days were quiet at the Hayes household, and no one came looking for me. I knew my future sister-in-law, Victoria, must have smoothed things over. It seemed I'd played my cards right. My life as a wealthy slacker was secure. But the next day, I wasn't smiling anymore. Drake was dead, killed in a hit and run. It seemed my future sister-in-law was even more ruthless than I'd imagined. Suddenly, this family felt terrifying. Everyone wore a perfect mask while coldly eliminating any obstacle in their path. My elite brother, Liam, was like that, and so was Victoria. I was the only anomaly, a guy who just wanted to coast and enjoy life. A chill ran down my spine, and I shot up in bed. I had to move out immediately, get away from these ruthless people. You have to be alive to keep coasting. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. The next morning, I came downstairs with a pre-packed suitcase. My mother was sitting in the living room, elegantly sipping her morning tea. She merely glanced up at me, her tone flat. Going somewhere? Finding a new place to sleep? She didn't ask again, returning her attention to her financial magazine. My so-called father was nowhere to be seen. This house was as cold as a tomb. I dragged my suitcase out of that magnificent villa without a backward glance. I had a penthouse apartment downtown that I'd bought a while ago, and now it was finally coming in handy. The apartment was huge and empty, the refrigerator completely bare. I drove to the biggest supermarket nearby, needing to fill my new home with food and junk food. Pushing a cart, I moved through the aisles of endless products. I was like a shopping robot, expressionlessly tossing items into my cart. As I rounded a corner, I suddenly stopped. In the corner of the snack aisle, I saw a girl furtively stuffing a bag of bread into her sleeve. She looked a few years younger than me, small and slight, wearing a faded school uniform. Her face was clean, but her actions weren't. I didn't say anything, just leaned against the shelf with my arms crossed, watching her with amusement. She was struggling. The sleeve was too small and the bread too big. She tried several times, beads of sweat forming on her forehead from the effort. Finally, as if sensing something, she froze and slowly looked up. Our eyes met. I stared at her without speaking. In the span of 10 seconds, her face went from pale to crimson. Her large eyes first showed terror, then panic, and finally, they were filled with a shame so thick it was suffocating. The hand holding the bread was shaking uncontrollably. With a soft thud, the bread fell to the floor. It was as if all the strength had been drained from her. She wilted, bowing her head so low she seemed to wish she could bury it in the ground. Boring. I walked over, bent down to pick up the bread, and tossed it into my cart. Then, I casually swept all sorts of cookies and candies from the adjacent shelf into my cart as well. Soon, it was piled high like a small mountain. I pushed the cart in front of her. She was still looking down, her body tense as if awaiting judgment. I nudged her faded canvas shoes with the toe of my sneaker, my tone flat. No money for food? Her body flinched, and she gave a tiny nod. A second later, as if remembering something, she shook her head violently. I was getting impatient, nodding, shaking your head. What is this, a pantomime? What's going on? Speak up. My tone was a bit harsh. She flinched again, startled, and shot her head up to look at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and brimming with tears. She opened her mouth, but only a few muffled sounds came out as her hands gestured helplessly. I froze. In that instant, a single thought crossed my mind. She's mute. Seeing her desperate and helpless expression, my impatience instantly vanished. A wave of regret washed over me. In that moment, I felt like a complete asshole, the kind of guy who'd want to slap himself in the middle of the night just thinking about it. I didn't say another word. I turned, grabbed another cart, and filled it to the brim with non-perishable food. Pushing both carts, I motioned for her to follow. She seemed to be in a daze, so I didn't bother explaining and just grabbed her wrist, pulling her toward the checkout. After paying, I carried all the heavy bags while she trailed behind me like a little shadow, clutching a few of the lightest bags of snacks. I stuffed everything into the back of my sports car and told her to get in. She hesitated for a moment but then opened the passenger door and slid inside. I then asked for her address. She took my phone, her small fingers tapping on the screen for a while before finally pinpointing a location. It was in an old, rundown part of town, the kind of place I wouldn't even drive through. I didn't say anything and just started the car. The ride was eerily silent. She kept her head down the whole time, her hands clutching the hem of her shirt. The car navigated through narrow, dilapidated alleys, finally stopping in front of a crumbling tenement building that looked like it could collapse at any moment. I killed the engine and we unloaded the groceries together. The hallway was dark and damp, filled with the smell of mildew and other unidentifiable odors. She led me up to the third floor and opened a peeling wooden door. A strong smell of herbal medicine hit me. The room was tiny, so small you could see everything at a glance. I finally understood what bare bones truly meant. On a worn-out wooden bed lay a frail, emaciated old woman. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. The girl put down her things and rushed to the bedside, expertly tucking the old woman in, her eyes full of worry. I pretty much got the picture. It wasn't that she had no money for food, she had no money for her family's medical bills. Stealing bread was probably an act of extreme hunger, unwilling to touch the money saved for the old woman's care. Another sob story. I hated seeing this kind of stuff. After settling her grandmother, the girl walked up to me and bowed deeply. She then picked up a worn-out notebook from the table and quickly scribbled something in it. In neat handwriting, it said, "Thank you. How much was all this? I will definitely pay you back." I almost laughed at the words. Pay me back? With what? By stealing again? I didn't say anything, just pulled out my phone and called my family's personal assistant. I kept it brief. "Mr. Roberts, get me a private room at University Hospital. Send an ambulance to this address in the West Side tenements in 15 minutes. I'm sending you the location now. Bill it all to my account." The whole thing took less than a minute. The girl was completely dumbfounded, staring at me with her mouth agape, having forgotten to cry or write. I understood. Something she might spend her entire life hoping for was something I could arrange with a single phone call. I nudged the bag at her feet. "What are you staring at? Pack your things. Get ready to go to the hospital." She snapped out of her trance and began frantically packing. There wasn't much to pack, just a few faded old clothes and a chipped enamel mug. The ambulance arrived quickly, and professional paramedics carefully moved the old woman onto a stretcher. The entire time, the girl held onto the corner of my shirt, as if afraid I would suddenly disappear. It felt a little awkward, but I didn't shake her off. At the hospital, everything was arranged perfectly. A 24/7 private nurse for the room, a team of top specialists immediately starting their consultation. I stood outside the bright, clean hospital room, watching the busy doctors and nurses, and the girl by the bedside, looking both terrified and grateful. The dark cloud that had been hanging over me since Drake's death seemed to lift a little. It's true, money can buy a good mood. Just then, I felt a gentle tug on my shirt. She was holding up that worn-out notebook, on which she had written, "How can I ever repay your kindness?" I leaned against the doorframe and looked at her. "I never said you had to." She got anxious, scribbling furiously in her notebook, the words becoming messy. "No, I can't just take your money. You're a good person." Seeing the words "good person," the smile on my face widened. In this day and age, even a guy like me could be considered a good person. Money really is great. I cut off her frantic gesturing. "First of all, I'm not a good person. Second, like I said, I hate hassles. You standing here arguing with me about this is a hassle. Got it?" My twisted logic left her stunned, staring at me, unsure how to respond. I looked at her, sighed, and walked over. No more nonsense. I took the notebook and pen from her hands and wrote, let's just say I'm buying some insurance for the future. You study hard, get into a good college, and if I ever end up broke and begging on the street, you just have to remember to give me a bowl of soup. I shoved the notebook back into her hands. She stared at my words for a long, long time. Then she looked up, and from her eyes, as clear as mountain springs, the tears finally broke free. She didn't make a sound, just cried silently, teardrops splashing onto the old notebook. I looked away, feeling awkward. All right, stop crying. Your grandmother needs you. What good is all this weeping? I thought for a moment and added, what school do you go to? I'll have Mr. Roberts take care of your tuition, and I'll have him send you $1,000 a month for living expenses until you graduate college and find a job. Don't tell me you don't want it. Consider it part of the insurance premium. With that, I couldn't stand the sentimental scene any longer. I gave a few brief instructions to the doctor and left. Driving down the wide road, I suddenly found the situation comical. Me, the second son of the Caldwell family, ending up broke? Impossible. This was just me spending a little money to earn some good karma. After all, with the ruthless sharks I was surrounded by, I needed all the good karma I could get to ensure my life of lazy luxury continued forever. And then I was broke. 5 years. It only took 5 years. The news about my picture-perfect, elite older brother, Liam, broke while I was sunbathing on a private island. I almost laughed when I got the call. It was just as I expected. My brother, at his core, was an indecisive weakling who loved to play the part of the devoted husband. I couldn't even be bothered to go back and watch the drama unfold. All these high society marriages were more or less the same. It wasn't until my bank cards started getting frozen one by one, and all the properties, stocks, and funds in my name were transferred overnight, that I belatedly realized something was seriously wrong. By the time I rushed back from the island, it was all over. The Caldwell Corporation was now the Hayes Corporation. My father was indicted on multiple counts of financial crimes, the evidence irrefutable. He was going to spend the rest of his life in prison. My brother, Liam, was left with nothing. And me, the useless slacker who just wanted to coast, wasn't spared either. The personal fortune I had painstakingly saved for over 20 years was all gone. I stood at the door of my penthouse apartment, staring at the 2 stone-faced bodyguards in black suits blocking my way, my head spinning. Seriously? You want revenge? Fine. I wouldn't have cared if you'd destroyed my brainless brother. But sending my dad to prison and gutting the Caldwell Corporation? What was that about? The thought infuriated me. Was I living in some female-led revenge novel, cast as the disposable relative who gets wiped out as collateral damage? Just then, the door opened. Victoria Hayes was sitting on my favorite Italian sofa, elegantly swirling a glass of wine. 5 years had made her more beautiful and colder. The powerful aura of complete control she exuded was suffocating. She saw me, set down her glass, and gave me a gentle smile. Ethan, you're back? I didn't speak, just stared at her. She stood up, walked toward me, and reached out to touch my face. Don't look at me like that. I didn't want this to happen. I turned my head to avoid her touch. She wasn't annoyed, simply retracting her hand and speaking calmly. Your brother was too stupid. I gave him a chance, but he didn't take it. Victoria shook her head, a playful look in her eyes as she studied me. So, that's your excuse for taking down my entire family? She paused, her voice taking on a seductive tone. Things are different now. He wronged me first, so my revenge is justified. I don't need a husband anymore. She took a step closer, her presence intensely aggressive. Ethan, are you interested in staying with me? Big sister can take care of you, just like old times. I laughed so hard I almost cried. Wiping the corner of my eye, I looked at Victoria's flawless face. Hearing you say that, I'm starting to wonder if you arranged that little accident yourself. The smile on her face faltered for a split second, but I caught it. Any last shred of hope I had vanished. As I suspected, this woman was a complete psychopath who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. My smile disappeared. I looked at her, my face blank, and slowly raised my middle finger. The last trace of a smile vanished from her face, replaced by cold indifference. You don't know what's good for you. She waved her hand, not giving me another glance. The 2 bodyguards immediately stepped forward, grabbed me by each arm like I was a sack of potatoes, and roughly threw me out of my own home. Standing in the empty hallway, I let out a derisive snort. If I had actually fallen for her crap and stayed, I probably wouldn't even know how I died when she got bored of me. I knew I couldn't outplay her. She'd even taken down my old fox of a father. What chance did a hedonist like me have? Staying away from that psycho was more important than anything. Survival was key. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and found all the friends who used to call me E-Man. I dialed the first one. Hey, it's Ethan Caldwell. There was a 3-second pause on the other end, then a cautious voice said, Who? Sorry, you have the wrong number. The line went dead. I froze for a second, then gave a self-deprecating laugh and dialed the next number. Same result. The third, the fourth, they were all either wrong number or went straight to voicemail. I leaned against the cold wall, deleting those so-called friends from my phone one by one. By the end, only a few lonely family numbers remained. I sold everything of value I had on me, which amounted to less than $20,000. Before, that wouldn't have even covered a night out. Now, it was all I had. I wandered aimlessly through the streets, eventually finding myself back in front of my old apartment building. I couldn't help but give a bitter smile. If worst comes to worst, I could always get a factory job. Low barrier to entry, room and board included. I'd had a good 20-plus year run of the high life anyway. I was walking with my head down, lost in thought, when I suddenly bumped into someone, a soft embrace. A faint, clean scent reached me. I instinctively started to apologize and looked up, only to find myself staring into a pair of crystal-clear eyes. It was a girl with a delicate face. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. She clearly knew me, though. I could see it in her eyes, the way they lit up with an indescribable mix of surprise and relief the moment she recognized me. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but then seemed to realize something and instead fumbled for her phone. She typed quickly, then showed me the screen. It read, "Mr. Caldwell, do you remember me?" I looked at the name Mr. Caldwell. Not many people called me that anymore. I studied her face, and the fragments of memory slowly pieced themselves together. It hit me and I was surprised. The girl trembling in the supermarket 5 years ago, the one taking care of her grandmother in that rundown shack. "It's you." Her eyes became astonishingly bright as she nodded vigorously, the joy practically spilling out of them. I was even more confused. "What are you doing here?" She typed quickly again and held the phone up to me. The screen read, "I saw the news about the Caldwell family. I was worried about you. I guessed you might come back here to look, so I've been waiting here since yesterday." My heart felt like it had been punched. That meant for the entire 24 hours since I'd been kicked out, she had been waiting here, outside the building I could no longer enter, holding onto a slim, uncertain possibility in the most foolish way. A wave of absurd and complex emotions washed over me. While all my so-called friends were busy cutting ties with me, a girl I had almost completely forgotten had been waiting here for me for a day and a night. I forced a smile, wanting to say something. She seemed to sense my awkwardness, and her phone screen lit up again. "Do you have nowhere to go?" I remained silent, which was as good as a yes. She put her phone away and then did something I never expected. She reached out and gently tugged on the sleeve of my hoodie. Her grip was weak. I could have easily pulled away, but that faint, pleading pressure felt like an invisible chain, holding me in place. She led me around the corner. As if possessed, I didn't resist and simply followed her. We stopped in front of a small, warmly lit bakery. The sign read Glimmer Bakery. The shop was closed, but the lights in the display window were still on. She unlocked the door with a key and then looked back, gesturing for me to come inside. The shop wasn't large, but it was clean and tidy, the air filled with the scent of cream and wheat. From under the counter, she pulled out a carefully preserved folder. She took out a yellowed piece of paper and pushed it in front of me. It was the insurance policy I had scrawled 5 years ago. "If I ever end up broke and begging on the street, you just have to remember to give me a bowl of soup." She pointed to the words, then to me, then to herself and the shop. Her expression was as serious as if she were fulfilling a sacred contract. Finally, she turned, took a still warm croissant from the oven, and handed it to me. There was no pity, no sympathy, just a matter-of-fact sense of "it's my turn now." I took the croissant and bit into it. Couldn't compare to the gourmet food I was used to, but it had a comforting taste. "Are you guys hiring?" The girl froze for a second, then a brilliant smile bloomed on her face. She nodded vigorously. That day, the aimless first half of my life came to an end. The second half would be inextricably linked to this little shop called Glimmer. And my new boss was the mute girl I thought I'd never see again. The girl's name was Chloe. Using the money I had provided and her own savings, she had opened this bakery on this street after graduating from college. The shop was small, but business was good. The neighbors all seemed to look out for her, often going out of their way to buy a few pastries and chat for a bit. It's not easy for a young girl on her own. It's good she has a helper now, makes you feel more at ease. I wore an apron with a little bear on it, clumsily packaging freshly baked bread, and listened to their comments without feeling much of anything. At ease? Me? A useless bum who couldn't do a single practical thing. How could they possibly think I was reassuring? Still, my arrival did lighten her load considerably. At least she no longer had to grit her teeth and haul heavy sacks of flour and sugar by herself. When the shop closed at night, we'd go upstairs to the tiny apartment. If her old place was bare bones, this one was maybe a step up. One dining table, 2 chairs, a sofa, and a small room partitioned off from the balcony. That was my bedroom. It was smaller than the bathroom in my old villa, but I slept more soundly there than I had in over 20 years. There were no schemes, no hypocrisy, just the faint scent of wheat wafting up from downstairs. I started learning how to be a normal person, learning how to sweep without kicking up a cloud of dust, learning how to use a pressure cooker without blowing up the kitchen. Most of the time, the results were disastrous. I once mistook salt for sugar and made a pot of incredibly salty red bean soup. She took a bite, her face scrunching up, but she didn't spit it out. She just quietly drank a large glass of water and then wrote in her notebook, "It has a very unique flavor. Maybe a little less sugar next time." Looking at her earnest expression, I was both annoyed and amused. I snatched the bowl from her and dumped it in the trash. After that, I started learning sign language. I bought a bunch of books, and every night, after she went to sleep, I'd practice in my little room, following videos on my phone. I started with the basics like hello and thank you, and moved on to "you worked hard today" and "good night." The first time I awkwardly signed "good morning" to her, she froze. Then her usually calm eyes lit up as if a star had fallen into them, shining with astonishing brightness. She raised her own hands and signed back with equal seriousness. In that moment, I felt that nothing I had done in the past 20+ years had ever felt so worthwhile. The days passed, and things gradually got better. I went from a fool who didn't even know how to use an oven to an apprentice baker who could skillfully whip cream and pipe decorations. Business improved so much that we even took over the shop next door and expanded. I also had a decent amount of savings in my account again, enough to move out and rent my own place. I thought about bringing it up with Chloe several times, but I always swallowed the words. Move out to where? Eat what? It would be so boring alone. Besides, it wasn't easy for a young woman on her own, and I could help out, right? I came up with several excuses for myself and shamelessly continued to stay. Chloe never mentioned it either. She seemed to have accepted my presence as a given. I didn't believe in love. My father and my brother were the perfect cautionary tales. But the sense of peace I felt with Chloe was addictive. I shook my head, trying to clear it of these messy thoughts. It was almost noon, time to make her lunch. I was untying my apron, about to head upstairs, when a familiar figure pushed open the shop door and walked in. The visitor wore a perfectly tailored suit. Her makeup was flawless, and her hair was styled in an impeccable updo. She radiated the aura of a successful professional. It was Isabella Vance. 5 years had washed away every trace of the poverty-stricken humility and desperation she once had. She was no longer the ice queen in a faded uniform begging me for help. Now she was polished and perfect. A young man in his early 20s followed her, dressed in a sharp suit like a recent college grad. He looked at me with unconcealed hostility. Probably her assistant. Isabella's gaze lingered on my teddy bear apron for a moment, her brow furrowing almost imperceptibly before she smoothed her expression back into a polite smile. "Ethan, long time no see." I nodded in acknowledgement, continuing to untie my apron. She seemed to want to ask something but thought better of it. Instead, she took a check from her purse and pushed it across the counter to me. "This is $150,000. I know we're still a few years away from the 10-year mark, but I'm able to now, so I wanted to pay you back early." I glanced at the number on the check, picked it up, and stuffed it in my pocket. "Thanks. This is what you owed me." I had never actually expected to get it back. The assistant behind her saw how quickly I took the money, and the disdain in his eyes intensified. Isabella quickly composed herself, her eyes sweeping over our small bakery before landing on my face. It was a look I knew all too well, condescending pity. "Ethan, I heard about what happened to your family. If you don't have anywhere to go right now, you can come work at my company. My husband and I just started our firm, and we're hiring." Her deliberately compassionate act made my stomach turn. That deal back then was an investment. She had paid her debt and we were even. Now she was putting on this show, trying to turn her former creditor into a charity case. I looked at her assistant, whose glare was growing more hostile by the second, and it suddenly clicked. She was enjoying the thrill of saving someone, just as I had once enjoyed watching her squirm. Now she was savoring my downfall. The only difference was that she was more hypocritical, cloaking her actions in a veneer of kindness. I refused coldly. "No thanks, I'm fine here." Isabella's smile stiffened. "Ethan, don't be stubborn. I know the kind of life you used to live." I cut her off, my voice edged with impatience. I said no thanks. She finally dropped it, a flicker of displeasure crossing her beautiful face. "Fine, if you've made up your mind, I won't force you." As she turned to leave, her assistant immediately stepped forward, placing a solicitous hand near her arm. Isabella naturally turned her head and gave him a smile that was clearly just for him. Now, I casually raised my phone, aimed it at them, and silently snapped a picture. The angle was perfect. The assistant's hand was almost on her waist, and the smile on her face was one no one would mistake for a simple look to a subordinate. I raised my phone in a little wave. "Take care." Then I spent 2.5 minutes finding her husband's public email address online and anonymously sent him the photo. After that, I deleted the picture and the sent email. I felt much better. After a quiet lunch with Chloe, my mind finally settled. Leaning against the counter, I started thinking about what to do with the $150,000. The number on the check was almost dazzling. How long had it been since I'd seen that much money? At least now our lives wouldn't be so tight, and Chloe could finally get the new equipment she'd been wanting. The more I thought about it, the happier I became. I'd never felt that money could be so useful. Just then, the bell on the door chimed, and a clear, deliberately fragile voice interrupted my thoughts. Ethan, I turned and saw Scarlett Hayes. Wow, a lot of familiar faces today. If I remembered correctly, her unlucky husband, Caleb, had been dead for less than 2 years. What do you want? I asked, leaning against the counter, my expression neutral. She bit her lip, her eyes shimmering, her hesitant act making me sick to my stomach. Scarlett's voice was laced with a hint of grievance. I wanted to see you. Miss Hayes, what's the act this time? I almost laughed out loud. Her eyes immediately reddened as if she'd been deeply wronged. Ethan, I know I was foolish before, I made a lot of mistakes. I always thought I wanted some grand, passionate love. But now I understand that what I really want is just a stable home. Her tone was sincere, her eyes full of emotion. She looked up, her watery eyes fixed on me, brimming with affection and nostalgia. Ethan, let's start over. I know about your situation, and what my sister did was too much. But it's okay. I can support you. Her voice carried a tone of pity and charity. Oh, the prodigal daughter returns act. But let's get one thing straight. When did we ever start anything? I fought the urge to roll my eyes as my mind drifted back a few years. Her wedding to that scholarship kid, Caleb, had been grand and touching. At the altar, she had cried, saying he was the light of her life, the happiness she would hold on to no matter what. I was in the audience, looking at that poor Gandong Sashalza, and I had only one thought: this guy is doomed. Sure enough, less than 2 years into the marriage, Scarlett got bored. When the passion faded and marriage became about daily life, she grew tired of it. Then, a conveniently charming new guy appeared. Luckily for her, the poor kid wasn't a total pushover. He had evidence against Scarlett and wanted to fight for himself. And then he died. What a coincidence. I figured it was the handiwork of my dear ex-future sister-in-law, Victoria. Snapping back to the present, I looked at Scarlett, still playing her part, a smirk growing on my face. Scarlett, do you think all men are idiots? Her expression froze. Your husband's funeral was quite the spectacle, I said slowly. I saw it on the news. You cried your heart out, a truly heartbreaking performance. It's just a shame that I happened to see someone who looked a lot like you getting into a hotel elevator with a handsome guy that same night. The color drained from Scarlett's face. Oh, right, that handsome guy didn't last long either, did he? Jumped off a building, I heard. Scarlett, aren't you tired? I took a step closer, staring into her trembling eyes. Wearing a mask and acting every single day, doesn't it make you sick? I backed her up against the doorframe, and she trembled like a leaf in the wind. You're lying, she retorted, trying to sound tough, but her voice was weak and hollow. I was done wasting my breath on her. I wasn't worried about her retaliating. A woman so obsessed with playing the victim would never allow herself to lose her composure and seek revenge out of anger. Her persona was more important to her than her life. She'd worn that mask for so long, it was stuck to her face. Get out. As if granted a pardon, she stumbled out of the shop, her retreat a pathetic sight. The shop was finally quiet again. I let out a long sigh, feeling as if I had just exhaled 5 years of bad luck. I heard light footsteps on the stairs, and Chloe came down with a bowl of freshly made dessert. She walked up to me, handed me the bowl, and her eyes asked what had happened. I shook my head to show it was nothing. Chloe signed, her expression worried. But you don't look happy. I looked into her clear eyes and smiled. Without putting down the bowl, I signed back with my still clumsy hands, I'm fine. She understood, and a sweet smile spread across her face. Sunlight streamed in through the window, warming us. After that day, I stopped paying attention to my old social circle and cut off all contact. All I wanted now was to live a quiet, peaceful life with Chloe, running our little shop. Every morning at 5 a.m., I would wake up half an hour before her to go downstairs and prepare the first batch of dough. By the time she came down, sleepy-eyed, the kitchen would be filled with the scent of wheat, and the hot water would be ready. She would always sign good morning to me first, then skillfully tie on her apron and start on the day's desserts. We rarely spoke, but our teamwork became more and more seamless. When we were busy, she would sometimes get flustered and break into a sweat, and I would hand her a glass of ice water. When she took the glass, her cool, soft fingers would occasionally brush against the back of my hand. I started noticing all her little habits, and she no longer had to cautiously guess what I was thinking. Life was fulfilling. We ran the shop together during the day, and at night, she would teach me how to make more complex desserts. Sometimes, we could have a whole conversation without using a pen and paper. This silent understanding gave me a sense of peace. I started to seriously consider something. I wanted to marry her. I didn't believe in love, but I was starting to believe that some people are just meant to be together. I simply wanted to continue living like this with her, forever. 3 months later, I confessed my feelings to her. Or more accurately, I proposed. It was her birthday, and I had secretly prepared a little surprise for her in the shop. When she came downstairs that evening, the entire place was lit by candles. She stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, her hands covering her mouth. I walked up to her, got down on one knee, and pulled out a diamond ring. Chloe, I don't know how to say all the pretty words, and I don't believe in grand promises, but I want to be with you, to run this shop together until we're too old to walk. Will you marry me? she cried, tears falling like broken pearls. She nodded vigorously and held out her hand for me to put the ring on. It was a little big, her hand was so slender, but she clenched her fist tightly to keep it from falling off. I hugged her, inhaling the faint, sweet scent of her hair. In that moment, I suddenly felt that the first 20+ years of my life had all been preparation for meeting her. Our wedding was simple, not a large affair. We only invited the neighbors and a few old classmates and friends I was still on good terms with. I wasn't trying to put on a show, I just wanted to give Chloe a proper wedding. The day before, I got a haircut and bought a decent suit. We had picked out Chloe's wedding dress together. When she tried it on, she was absolutely radiant. Standing outside the dressing room, watching her in the mirror, it all felt a bit surreal. This girl, as beautiful as an angel, was really going to marry me. On the wedding day, everything went smoothly. Chloe's grandmother had recovered significantly and attended in a wheelchair. The old woman took my hand and said in a weak voice, "Thank you for taking care of our Chloe." I felt a little embarrassed. She was the one who had taken care of me. When we exchanged rings, Chloe's hand was trembling. I held it steady and whispered in her ear, "Don't be nervous, it's just a formality." She let out a little laugh, and her tension vanished. "Ethan Caldwell, do you take Chloe to be your wife, to love and protect her, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health?" "I do." "Chloe, do you take Ethan to be your husband, to love and respect him, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health?" Chloe couldn't speak, but she nodded emphatically and then signed, "I do." The officiant was a bit taken aback, unsure what to do. I smiled and translated for her. She said, "I do." The crowd erupted in applause. When it was time to kiss, she was shy, her face blushing like an apple. I kissed her lips gently, so lightly, as if afraid of hurting her. Then I whispered in her ear, "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm in your hands now." She laughed so hard in my arms that her shoulders shook. My old classmates came up to offer their congratulations. A former roommate I'd been close with said, "Ethan, you've changed. You used to have this, I don't care about anything attitude, but now you seem like a normal person." I glanced over at Chloe, who was talking with her grandmother, and smiled. Maybe it's because I finally have someone worth caring about. After the wedding, we went back to our apartment upstairs. Everything was the same, just with the addition of flowers and gifts from the ceremony. Chloe changed out of her wedding dress and into her regular clothes and started making me a late-night snack in the kitchen. I stood at the doorway watching her and felt a profound sense of contentment. This was the life I wanted, a simple life with just the two of us. She brought the snack over and saw me staring into space. She waved her hand in front of my face. "What are you thinking about?" "Thinking about you." Her face turned red again, and she playfully slapped my arm. Then she wrote in her notebook, "Ethan, we're married now. Do you have any regrets?" I shook my head. "No regrets." "You?" "No regrets either. It just feels a little unreal, like a dream." I reached out and pinched her cheek. "Does that hurt?" She covered her face and glared at me, then wrote in the notebook, "It's not a dream, and also, I love you." Chloe's fingers trembled slightly as she wrote those 3 words. Under the dim yellow light, her eyelashes looked like the rain-soaked wings of a butterfly. I stared at the words, and my heart felt like it had been struck by something heavy. It wasn't the racing pulse from a high school crush's confession, nor the vain satisfaction of spending a fortune, but a deep, dull ache wrapped in an unprecedented sense of security. I took the pen from her hand, closed the notebook, and put on a serious face. "Mrs. Caldwell, are you trying to give me insomnia, writing things like this at night?" She quickly waved her hands, her face flushing red, and awkwardly signed, "It's true." I sighed, pulled her into my arms, and rested my chin on the top of her soft hair. "Yeah, I know." The person in my arms grew quiet, her gentle breath tickling my neck. In that moment, I suddenly felt that what I had now, the wealth of the Caldwells, Victoria Hayes, Isabella Vance, none of it mattered. What I had now was worth more than everything from the past 20+ years combined. But fate has a way of tripping you up just when you feel happiest. Married life was like bread rising in the oven, warm and fulfilling. We would wake up at 4 a.m. to knead the dough, and by 6 a.m., the first batch of croissants would be out, filling the whole house with their aroma. Chloe taught me how to pipe frosting. My clumsy hands always made a mess of the cream, but she never got annoyed, just gently guided my hand to correct it. In the afternoons when customers were few, she would nap at the counter, sunlight filtering through the window and casting dappled light on her face. I often found myself staring at her as she slept, wondering how this girl could be so pure, as if she had never been tainted by this rotten world. But the mud always finds a way to splash you. One rainy night, as we were about to close, a few drunk men burst through the glass door. The leader was a local thug named Frankie, who had tried to shake us down for protection money before I chased him off with a broom. Now, reeking of alcohol, he kicked over a potted plant by the door and yelled arrogantly, "Hey, mute girl, get out here." Chloe was counting the day's earnings and jumped at the sound, instinctively looking at me. I pushed her behind me and grabbed a rolling pin, pointing it at him. Frankie grinned, revealing yellowed teeth. Well, Mr. Caldwell, still think you're somebody?" Heard you married a mute. Me and the boys came by for a wedding drink. The thugs behind him laughed, their leering eyes fixed on Chloe, making me sick. I tightened my grip on the rolling pin, my knuckles turning white. Get out. Ooh, protective are we? He took a step closer, his boozy breath hitting my face. You don't want this shop to stay open? Suddenly, Chloe slipped out from behind me, holding a box of freshly baked cookies. She forced a smile and signed to them, offering them some. In that moment, my heart felt like it had been stabbed with a needle. This sweet fool always thought kindness could defuse malice. Frankie slapped the box out of her hands, sending cookies scattering across the floor. Who wants this crap? He reached out to grab Chloe's wrist. I snapped. I swung the rolling pin with all my might. In the chaos, I don't know how many punches and kicks I took. I just remember shielding Chloe in the corner behind the counter. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, and the thugs scattered. Chloe's trembling hand reached up to touch the blood on my lip, huge tears rolling down her face, but she couldn't make a sound. I wiped my face and forced a grin. What are you crying for? Your man's not dead yet. She cried even harder, curling up in my arms like a frightened little animal. That night, she slept holding onto my arm, startling awake at the slightest movement. Looking at the dark circles under her eyes, a violent, retroactive fear churned inside me. What if I hadn't been able to protect her today? The next day, I bought a solid steel pipe at a flea market and kept it under the counter. When Chloe saw it, she shook her head vehemently. I tapped the pipe and signed, for protection. It's better if we don't have to use it, she wrote in her notebook. I'm afraid you'll get hurt. I'm more afraid of you getting hurt, I said, ruffling her hair. Chloe, you're all I have now. She looked up at me, her eyes glistening, and finally gave a small nod. The peace didn't last long. Scarlett reappeared like a persistent ghost. This time, she didn't come into the shop. She pulled up in a flashy red sports car, sunglasses covering half her face, and beckoned to me with her finger. I was moving flour and couldn't be bothered with her. So she got out of the car, leaned against the door, and smirked. Ethan, does your wife know how you helped Isabella Vance? Her tone was pure provocation. My hand slipped, and the flour sack hit the ground with a thud, sending up a cloud of white dust. Chloe heard the noise and ran out of the shop, looking at us with confusion. Scarlett took off her sunglasses, her gaze sweeping over Chloe with undisguised pity. So pathetic, ending up with a loser who couldn't even afford a decent wedding. I clenched my fists, a vein throbbing in my temple. Scarlett, shut your mouth. What, scared? You weren't like this back then. When the campus queen was begging you, didn't you enjoy the thrill of being the benefactor? Why pretend to be so devoted now? Chloe couldn't understand Scarlett's words, but she could feel the tense atmosphere. She gently tugged on my shirt, her eyes full of worry. I took a deep breath, suppressed my anger, and turned to sign to Chloe, "It's nothing, go back inside." Chloe hesitated, not moving, but Scarlett suddenly played a recording from her phone. It was Isabella's tear-choked voice from the woods all those years ago. "I'll give you my heart, my everything, if you'll just promise me one thing," followed by my voice, "I'm not a philanthropist." Chloe's face went white. She looked at me, then at Scarlett, her lips moving frantically but making no sound. Scarlett put her phone away, satisfied. "Sweetie, you think he's a good guy? He only helped Isabella to enjoy her misery. Helping you was probably just another whim." "You're talking nonsense." I completely lost it and lunged for her phone. Scarlett shrieked, jumped into her car, locked the doors and sped away, leaving just me and Chloe, standing in a cloud of flour dust. She stood with her head down, her shoulders trembling slightly. I reached for her, but she instinctively took a step back. That single step felt like a knife in my heart. After closing up that night, the atmosphere in the apartment was suffocating. Chloe was making the bed with her back to me, refusing to look at me. I turned her by the shoulders, forcing her to face me. "Do you believe her?" Chloe bit her lip, tears welling in her eyes, and wrote in her notebook, "Is what she said true? Yes, but not entirely." I wiped my face and told her everything, how I had refused Isabella, how I had set up the contract. "Chloe, I admit I'm not a good person, but with you, I never once thought of it as charity." She was silent for so long I thought she would never speak to me again. Finally, she raised her hands and slowly signed, "I'm scared." "Scared of what?" "I'm scared that one day you'll get bored of me and leave me." Her fingers trembled. "I have nothing. I only have you." My heart clenched, and I pulled her tightly into my arms. "You silly girl, you're the only one I have." That night, we held each other as we slept, like two wounded animals licking each other's wounds. Scarlett's words were like a thorn in Chloe's heart. She became sensitive. If I was 10 minutes late coming home, she would be restless. If a female customer chatted with me for too long, she would quietly walk away. I noticed, but I didn't know how to fix it. Until one night, I woke up and found the space beside me empty. Chloe was curled up in a corner of the balcony, crying silently in the moonlight. I went over and hugged her from behind. Her body tensed, then relaxed, and she buried her face in my chest. "Chloe, let me tell you a story." I told her about my parents, about my brother and Victoria, about the rot beneath the glamorous facade of my family. I used to not believe in feelings. I thought everything was a transaction. But you're different. I gently wiped away her tears. You make me feel like there's still some humanity in being alive. She looked up, and in the moonlight, her eyes were like black glass submerged in water. She reached out and traced my eyebrows, my eyes, my nose, finally stopping on my lips. Then she leaned in and kissed me very, very gently. It was a pure kiss, free of any desire, like the first snowflake landing on your palm. I froze, then responded to her. In that kiss, something quietly melted away. It was the thorn Scarlet had planted, silently removed. Life returned to normal, but danger always lurks in the shadows. One afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived at the shop, Victoria Hayes. 5 years had made her even more regal. Her custom-tailored suit was completely out of place in our cramped bakery. She was alone, without bodyguards, and when her eyes landed on Chloe, they were cold and appraising. So this is the life you've chosen? Hiding out in a place like this, playing house with a mute. I moved to shield Chloe behind me. If you have something to say, say it. She ignored me and sat down in a chair. Ethan, you're still so naive. I recently found out something interesting about your little wife's background. Chloe's hand tightened on my arm. Victoria slowly opened her handbag, took out a yellowed photograph, and slid it across the table. It was a picture of a young man and woman. The man's features bore a slight resemblance to Chloe, and the woman was holding a baby. Your grandmother never told you, did she? She said, looking at Chloe with a cold smile. Your parents didn't die of illness. It was a car accident, and the man who killed them was named Harrison Caldwell, Ethan's father. Drunk driving, you know? The air froze. My mind went blank with a deafening roar, and I almost lost my balance. Chloe stared at the photograph, her face as white as a sheet. Surprised. Victoria stood up, looking down on us. Ethan, your father killed her parents, and now you're playing the devoted husband. How ironic. Shut up, I roared, but my voice was shaking violently. Victoria leaned down close to Chloe and whispered, Sweetie, do you think he's only nice to you out of guilt? Then she turned and left as if she had never been there, leaving behind a hellish silence. Chloe didn't move, as if her soul had been ripped from her body. I reached for her, but she flinched away as if shocked, her eyes empty and distant. Chloe, listen to me. I didn't know. Chloe shoved me away, ran upstairs, and slammed the apartment door, the lock clicking shut. I followed, pounding on the door, but there was no response. After a while, a piece of paper slid out from under the door. On it were a few trembling words. Let me be alone. I sat outside her door until dawn. There was no sound from inside, but I knew she wasn't sleeping either. The next day, Chloe didn't come down to open the shop. I made some porridge and brought it up, but the door was still locked. It was the same on the third day and the fourth. She had locked herself in, refusing to eat or drink. The bomb Victoria had dropped nearly destroyed the small world we had just built. For the days Chloe locked herself in the apartment, I was like a caged animal, pacing back and forth in the small shop. Flour sacks were strewn about, burnt cookies from days ago sat on baking sheets, and the air was thick with the sour smell of desperate fermentation. I wanted to smash down that thin door countless times, but every time I saw another, let me be alone, note slid under the door, the handwriting growing more frantic. My raised hand would fall limply to my side. I was afraid that my presence would be the final straw that broke her. This feeling of helplessness was worse than when my family fell apart. Back then, at least I could be angry, I could curse, I could pack a bag and leave. But now, I didn't even have the right to be angry. The blood of the man responsible ran through my veins. Victoria had found my weakest point and shattered it with a single blow. On the fifth night, I heard a muffled whimper from the apartment, like a small animal's cry, followed by the heavy thud of something falling. My heart stopped. I couldn't wait any longer. I used the spare key and burst through the door. Chloe had collapsed by the bed, her face ashen, her lips cracked. An overturned water glass lay beside her. It seemed she had tried to get a drink but didn't even have the strength for that. After days without food or water, her body had reached its limit. I rushed over and picked her up. She was as light as a feather, as if she might fade away at any moment. Chloe, Chloe. I patted her face, my voice shaking uncontrollably. Her eyelids fluttered, slowly opening a crack. Her empty eyes landed on my face, unfocused. In that moment, I was terrified she was going to die, terrified I would never even have a chance to atone. I scrambled downstairs like a madman, heated up some porridge, and mixed it with warm water. I gently pried open her lips and carefully fed it to her with a small spoon. She swallowed mechanically, her gaze still vacant. After half a bowl, I brought warm water and a towel and gently wiped her gaunt face and cold hands and feet. Through it all, she was like a doll, letting me do as I pleased. Only the occasional tear rolling down her cheek proved she was still alive. I tucked her back into bed and lay down beside her, fully clothed, holding her tightly through the blanket. I didn't dare to sleep, afraid she would disappear if I closed my eyes. Chloe, I whispered in her ear, my voice hoarse. I know you can hear me. You can hate me, you can blame me, whatever you want, but you can't die. What would I do if you died? I've been an asshole for most of my life, but I've never wanted to hurt anyone. I'll own my father's sins. If you think killing me will make you feel better, I'll give you the knife right now. I took her hand and pressed it against my heart. But you can't punish me, punish yourself like this. Your grandmother worked her fingers to the bone to raise you, not for you to end it like this. Remember that croissant you gave me? It was the most bitter and the sweetest thing I've ever eaten. Bitter because I was at rock bottom, and sweet because of you. This shop is called Glimmer, and you're the one who lit it up. If you're gone, that light goes out, and my world will be completely dark. I don't know how long I talked, until my throat was raw. The body in my arms was still cold, but her breathing seemed to have stabilized. The next morning, as I was about to get up to make her something to eat, a cold hand gently tugged on my sleeve. I whipped my head around and met her gaze. Her eyes were still swollen, but there was a faint light in them now. She looked at me. Her lips moved without a sound, but I could make out the shape of the word water. I practically fell over myself getting her water, my hands shaking so much I spilled half of it. After helping her take a few sips, she leaned against me and closed her eyes, another tear slipping from the corner. But this time, it wasn't a tear of despair, but one of weary vulnerability. She was letting me near her again. The realization almost made me cry with relief. The days that followed were a slow, difficult process of healing. Chloe's physical strength returned, but the wound in her heart was far from closed. She became unusually quiet, even more so than before. She would still help me with the shop, but her movements were slow, and she would often just stare blankly at the mixing bowl. At night, she would still wake up from nightmares, drenched in a cold sweat. I would hold her, feeling her heart pound wildly against her ribs. She stopped using the notebook to communicate, only using simple gestures when absolutely necessary. I knew that thorn was still lodged deep in her heart. Victoria's words were like poison, corroding all the trust she had in our relationship. She started to subconsciously avoid my touch. If I put food on her plate, she would hesitate before accepting it. If I tried to hold her at night, she would stiffen and turn away. This deliberate distance was more suffocating than any argument. I understood she was struggling, reevaluating everything between us. Was my help, my proposal, my love, all just born from a delayed, inherited guilt? The turning point came one afternoon. An elderly woman who was a regular customer for our whole wheat bread shakily handed us a thick envelope. She said it was a box of special cookies her son had sent from abroad and insisted we take it as a thank you for our kindness to her. Chloe couldn't refuse and accepted it. You and your husband are good people, dear. It's rare to find such honest business owners these days. You two take care of each other, the old woman said, holding Chloe's hand. After she left, Chloe stood behind the counter for a long time, holding the box of cookies. The sunlight shone on her lowered eyelashes. I watched from a distance, not daring to disturb her. Suddenly, she turned and walked over to me. She handed me the cookie box and then pointed to the box of old things in the corner. Inside were a few photos from our wedding and the worn-out notebook where I had written her insurance policy, which she had treasured. I paused for a second, then understood what she meant. I went over, pulled the notebook from the bottom of the box, dusted it off and handed it to her. She took it, flipped to the last blank page and began to write. Her hand was still a little shaky, but she wrote slowly and deliberately. I dreamed of my parents. They were in a very bright place, smiling at me. I don't think they blame you. She paused for a long time, the ink bleeding into a small dot on the page. Then she continued, I've been thinking, if you were only good to me out of guilt, then why, when I was stealing that bread, was there only impatience in your eyes, not pity? You just made a phone call to deal with a hassle. And why, when I said yes to your proposal, did you freeze for a moment, and then your ears turned red? She looked up at me, her eyes blurry with tears, filled with a profound confusion and a sliver of hope. She wasn't accusing me. She was asking me for an answer that could pull her out of this nightmare. I looked at her, my heart feeling as if it were being gently squeezed. I took the pen and wrote below her words, stroke by stroke, Chloe, I'm not a good person. When I helped you, I wasn't thinking much. Maybe I was just in a good mood that day, or maybe I just didn't want to hassle. When I married you, I wasn't even sure if it was love. I just knew that being with you felt right. It felt peaceful. But now, I know this for sure. I can't stand to see you cry, and I can't stand to see anyone bully you. When you're in pain, I wish I could take it for you. This has nothing to do with who my father was. It only has to do with you being Chloe. If we're talking about guilt, the only thing I feel guilty about is not meeting you sooner and letting you suffer so much, and not being able to protect you from being hurt again because of me. I handed the pen back to her. She read my words, and the tears fell even faster, but the corners of her mouth turned up slightly. It was a smile that was uglier than crying, but it was the most beautiful expression I had ever seen. She picked up the pen and, after my words, forcefully added 3 of her own. I believe you. Then she put down the pen, reached out and gently took my hand. Her fingers were still cold, but their firm grip instantly dispelled all the darkness in my heart. That night, for the first time in a long time, she didn't sleep with her back to me. She curled up in my arms like a fledgling that had finally found its nest, her breathing even and deep. Listening to the sound of her breath, I thought it was the most beautiful music in the world. We knew the scar was still there, and maybe it always would be, but at least we were learning to live with it. And by bearing this heavy burden together, the bond between us had become even stronger. The decision to leave the city was made a few days later. It wasn't entirely because of the danger from Victoria, but more because we wanted a change of scenery, a place without the shadows of the past, a true new beginning. Chloe didn't hesitate for a second. For her, wherever I was home. We sold Glimmer Bakery and packed our bags to move south. When the neighbors heard we were leaving, they all came to see us off, stuffing our bags with local specialties. "Dearie, if you're ever treated poorly, you come right back here. I'll stick up for you," one of the old women said, wiping her tears as she held Chloe's hand. Chloe, her eyes red, nodded and pressed a bag of freshly baked cookies into the woman's hands. The night before we left, we were packing the last of our things in the apartment. From the bottom of the closet, Chloe pulled out a small metal box. Inside were her grandmother's mementos, a few old photos, and the insurance policy I had written for her all those years ago. The paper was yellowed, but the writing was still clear. "If I ever end up broke and begging on the street, you just have to remember to give me a bowl of soup." She looked at the paper and suddenly smiled, a smile that turned into tears. She picked up a pen, and on the back of the paper, she solemnly wrote a few words and showed them to me. "For the rest of our lives, my bowl will always be half yours." My eyes burned, and I pulled her into my arms. "Okay, it's a deal." As the train pulled away, the city that held so much of our pain and our warmth receded outside the window. Chloe fell asleep on my shoulder, her hand still tightly clutching my shirt. The sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating her peaceful, serene face. I leaned down and kissed the top of her head, then closed my eyes. I didn't know what the future held, but as long as she was with me, anywhere was home. We eventually settled in a small coastal town called Seacliff. With the money from selling the shop, we opened an even smaller dessert place and named it Half Bowl Pastries. Chloe was in charge of baking and I handled the customers. Life was simple but peaceful. She gradually emerged from the shadows, and smiles returned to her face. Occasionally, she would still wake up from nightmares in the dead of night, but I was always there to hold her until she fell back asleep. One evening, a year later, we were walking hand in hand along the beach. The sunset painted the sky in molten gold, and the tide gently lapped at the shore. Chloe suddenly stopped and pointed at something glistening in the sand. I picked it up. It was a piece of sea glass, worn smooth by the waves, refracting a warm glow in the evening light. She took the glass, held it up to the light for a long time, then placed it in my palm and closed my fingers around it, signaling for me to keep it. I teased her. "A token of your love?" She nodded vigorously, her eyes sparkling. One hot and humid afternoon, the shop was empty. Chloe was at the counter preparing cake batter for the next day, while I sat behind the register going over the accounts. I heard a very faint sob and looked up. Chloe had stopped whisking, her hand frozen, and was staring blankly out the window. Outside, a young father was walking by with his daughter on his back, the little girl's bell-like laughter faintly audible through the glass. I put down the ledger and walked over to her. She didn't look at me, her gaze following the father and daughter until they disappeared around the corner. Her profile looked pale in the afternoon light, her eyes filled with a complex emotion I couldn't name, a mixture of longing and sorrow. I gently touched her arm. She snapped back to the present, gave me a forced smile, and shook her head to show she was fine. Then she looked down and began whisking the batter with renewed vigor, as if trying to beat away some unseen thought. I knew she was thinking about her own parents. The childhood that should have been filled with their love and laughter was a void that could never be filled. Victoria's words were a poisoned dart that, even on the sunniest days, could unexpectedly prick her with pain. After closing up that night, we sat on the small steps behind the shop, feeling the sea breeze. The waves gently lapped at the shore, and in the distance, the lights of fishing boats dotted the horizon. Chloe leaned her head on my shoulder, very quiet. I held her hand. Her palm was a little cold. "Chloe," I broke the silence. "Should we go see them?" Her body tensed slightly, and she looked up at me, confused. "I mean your parents," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I know where the cemetery is. It was in the files Victoria left. We can go talk to them, tell them you're doing well, and I can apologize on behalf of my father." The last few words were incredibly difficult to say, but I knew I had to. Chloe stared at me for a long time, tears quickly filling her eyes, but she fought to keep them from falling. Her gaze was a mixture of struggle and fear, but it eventually settled into a look of resolve. She nodded firmly. We chose a clear, sunny morning, closed the shop, and went to the cemetery on the outskirts of town with a bouquet of white daisies and green lisianthus that Chloe had arranged herself. The cemetery was quiet, nestled on a hill overlooking the sea, a peaceful place to rest. Using the information from the file, we found the shared headstone. It was simple, with a faded, blurry photo of Chloe's parents etched into it. Chloe walked to the grave, knelt, and gently placed the flowers down. She reached out and, with her fingertips, slowly wiped away the dust and fallen leaves from the headstone, her movements as gentle as if she were touching a fragile dream. She didn't cry, just wiped in silence. The sun shone on her focused profile, giving her an almost sacred tranquility. I stood behind her, watching silently for a long time. She stood up, turned, and beckoned me over. I walked to her side, and we stood together before the grave. The sea breeze rustled our hair and clothes. Chloe looked at the headstone, then at me. She raised her hands and began to sign. She moved slowly, as if pouring all her heart into each gesture. "Mom, Dad, this is Ethan, my husband." She paused, took a deep breath, and continued signing. "He's very good to me. We have our own little shop, called Half Bowl Pastries. Life is peaceful, and I'm very happy. We know what happened in the past." Her gestures became a little heavier but remained firm. "It was a terrible accident. I know it wasn't Ethan's fault. He is not his father." She turned to look at me, tears finally streaming silently down her face, but she was smiling. She turned back to the grave and signed, "So please, don't blame him and don't worry about me. I'm very happy now, I really am." Watching her introduce me to her parents, defend me, and tell them of her happiness, I felt a lump form in my throat and my eyes burned. I reached out and tightly grasped her free hand. I faced the headstone and bowed deeply. Straightening up, I looked at the faded photo and said solemnly, "Sir, ma'am, my name is Ethan. I'm sorry, and thank you. Thank you for bringing Chloe into this world. Please rest assured, as long as I'm alive, I will never let her suffer again. I will protect her with everything I have." I spoke slowly, every word from the bottom of my heart. I knew words were cheap, but it was all I could offer. After paying our respects, we walked hand in hand up the cemetery hill. On the way back, Chloe seemed remarkably light, as if a heavy burden she had carried for years had finally been lifted. She even excitedly pointed to some wildflowers by the road, signing that we could try using their juice as a natural food coloring. After that day, I noticed a subtle change in Chloe. The faint shadow that had always lingered in her eyes seemed to have faded, and her smiles became brighter and more open. She began to more actively plan our future with me, talking about what flowers to plant in front of the shop, whether we should rent the space next door to expand when we saved enough money, and even signing that maybe one day we could adopt a child. I knew that trip to the cemetery was not just about comforting her parents. It was a formal farewell to the past for both of us. We couldn't change the tragedy that had happened, but we could choose how to face the future. We had carefully poured out the half bowl filled with bitter memories. Then, into the remaining half, we added understanding, acceptance, and the sweetness Chloe had created herself, and began to slowly, carefully savor the taste of the rest of our lives. One day after closing, we were sitting by the sea, watching the sunset. The fading light painted the ocean in magnificent shades of gold and red. Chloe rested her head on my shoulder and suddenly traced a few words into my palm with her finger. Not sign language, but writing. I carefully deciphered it. She had written, "A half bowl of time, a heart full of joy." I leaned down and kissed her hair,